hold back. Please, do me the honor of tasting and offering your thoughts. Facts.
Hey guys, MrPokke here, back with another video, and on today's episode of CN Unit Analysis, we are going to be taking a look at Jiaoqiu as well as what he has to offer from the CN community. As usual, we have already seen some of the more basic stuff that I've shown you guys from the creator experience server, talking about his kits, Litecoins, team comps. Today I'm just going to be sharing, as per usual, the more in-depth stuff that you may or may not find useful, specifically what kind of team comps, how does he fare compared to other limited harmonies, Litecoins, gearing options, and without further ado, let's get into today's content.
Subscribe!
First things first, let's just get a complete summary of what Jiaoqiu has to offer. He is a 5-star Fire Nihility unit that pretty much applies the vulnerability debuff upon a AoE multiple enemies, to increase the damage output dealt by our entire team. That being said, Jiaoqiu also have the secondary effect of being a burn DOT that can be utilized with, Kafka, Black Swan, but it is a little bit more of the weaker side, especially if you did not unlock his E2. So if you want to run Jiaoqiu as a DOT unit, you may find him having a little bit less of a success compared to running him with Acheron, which as of this current moment is going to be Acheron's best slot nihility support at E0, right? So take that into consideration. Vulnerability from Jiaoqiu also has two main benefits, which is number one, he is extremely skill point positive and pretty much just cast your skill once, and afterwards you can almost always just cast skill basic, skill basic, and you are going to be maintaining skill point positivity for the entire fight. Also, the debuff coverage is also very nice, because unlike units like even like Ranmei and Robin, there might be a few moments where you run out of their buffs if you're not doing like 0 cycle or 1 cycle rush. Whereas for Jiaoqiu, this ultimate uptime is pretty much almost permanent, because of, first of all, it's only 100 energy, and second of all, the debuffs does last for a pretty considerable amount of time, right? So these are some of the good things. The debuffs, they also stay on the target even when we are changing waves. So you can see over here, going to the next wave, they will instantly be applied with the maximum stack of Acheron rolls, as well as the fact that they were changing phase, it will also apply the same amount of debuff. So it is this debuff will pretty much be almost always on the target throughout the entirety of the fight. No questions asked, right? So that is going to be that. As such, Jiaoqiu is going to be extremely beneficial for, in our current moment, Acheron team comps. He is by far the best in Nihility for Acheron at E0 S0. Excellent choice if you are going to be an Acheron user, right? Two main reasons. Number one being ultimate damage vulnerability itself, as well as how much stacks it can actually generate for Acheron in terms of slash dreams. So no other units that we have right now can generate as much slash dream stacks as compared to Jiaoqiu. That being said, Jiaoqiu is also not a character that is perfect, right? Unless you are going to be putting for him in an Acheron team comp, he might not be that useful. A lot of reasons being his personal damage is pretty low. He doesn't really do that well with DOT team comps. In fact, he doesn't really do that well with a lot of other team comps. And the reason why this is the case is because he is not really a full-on debuffer. He has an integral part of DOT tied to his kit, which is his 180% multiplier. And because he has this little bit of a DOT, it unfortunately reduces the overall core identity for Jiaoqiu, which is he's kind of trying to do both at the same time, even though he's mainly being a debuffer. But because of this DOT, it negatively impacts his ability as a debuffer himself. So I would much rather, for example, have a unit that is all on debuff, dealing no damage whatsoever, and this will amplify our Acheron's damage to an even higher standard, right? Or in the case of Kafka or Black Swan, just all in DOT and don't really care that much about debuff. So for Jiaoqiu's case, because he's trying to doing both at the same time, it might not be that considerable if you want to run him with units other than Acheron, right? Your hyper carry, your follow up, your DOT, you're probably never going to be running Jiaoqiu. Also, for another weakness that Jiaoqiu may have is in terms of his signature Litecoin, especially in pure fiction, it actually underperforms compared to the Litecoin solitary healing from Herda Store. So if you're going to be putting Jiaoqiu, especially if you're running him with Acheron for pure fiction, you might see yourself not even wanting to use signature Litecoin in the first place. But if you use him in a scenario like Apocalypse Shadows or Memory of Chaos, then his signature Litecoin offers much more utility compared to solitary healing. So it might be a little bit uncomfortable for players when you want to use him in all three different endgame modes. very briefly touching on Jiaoqiu's character kit, and fundamentally how he works is all tied to his talent, Acheron Rose. So Acheron Rose, as you guys know, it applies vulnerability debuff up to 35%, and it will pretty much stay on the target for the entirety of the fight because of his ultimate as well as his major trace. So the moment this debuff is applied, you can expect this debuff to be there for the entirety of the battle, which means Jiaoqiu's debuff coverage is very, very good. You wouldn't expect to see a situation where the debuffs actually run out of the enemy. Not to mention, when it comes to applying set debuffs from his basic skill ultimate, they can all apply Acheron Rose. So you are going to be not running into the issue where you won't have enough debuffs from Jiaoqiu, right? So that's going to be there. Again, one thing to note is even though Acheron Rose does provide flash gems for Acheron, for enemies that act twice like this elite, it only applies a single stack of Acheron Rose. Now, for this specific mechanic, this is where Acheron Rose could be used with a unit that's running Trend of Universal Market. So if you're running Acheron with another unit that's Trend of Universal Market and the unit attacks Fusion with Trend of Universal Market, it will receive 2 burns, one from Acheron Rose and one from Trend. This will only generate 1 stack from Acheron, and therefore it will clash. But that being said, there is one example which is for enemies that act twice, especially for units like this Ice Fatty, where if your first unit hit is not on Fusion, where for example he hits Acheron, then he gains 1 stack of Slash Dream from Acheron Rose, and then he were to perform an AoE ability or some sort of ability that attacks Fusion instead, then this will apply 2 stacks of Acheron Rose for Acheron. So in this kind of rare situations where if the enemy targets 2 different targets, first one being Acheron, second one being the unit with Trend of Universal Market, you can in fact still use Jiaoqiu with preservation units running this Light Cone, right? A little bit niche, but just keep in mind. Generally speaking, even though you could make it work, it is still not advisable. You can either go for a abundant sustain such as Gallagher with Quick Flow, which is an excellent sustain, or you can just go and slap on a little bit more of a defensive Light Cone options for a sustain, such as your Aventuring Light Cone, Fusion Light Cone, or even like Japart Light Cone, right? So that's gonna be that. Alright, talking about Jiaoqiu's traces, first of all, the 15 energy basically ensures that we get our turn 1 ultimate after casting a single skill. Very straightforward, not too much to talk about. Second trace about the attack percentage buff, which is a conversion from EHR to attack percentage. You basically get a free 100% attack, more or less, especially if you know on EHR you have. That being said, this attack that you gain from Jiaoqiu, like I mentioned in my previous video, it is not that significant because Jiaoqiu himself, the damage is way too low, especially if you're not getting him at E2, right? Without Eidolon 2, Jiaoqiu's damage is a little bit... You don't really need to care about Jiaoqiu's damage that much. You just want him to be used with the Acheron team in order to generate Slash Dream stacks. And that's pretty much it. So this attack, don't really worry about it. The most important talent for Jiaoqiu is actually going to be this right here, which is the Acheron Rose stacks. It can carry forward for different waves. Alright, so this is based on the calculated from the higher stacks, which means that once you have applied 4 stacks, when the next wave spawns in, that is going to be 4 stacks, right? So as you can see, for example, if Jiaoqiu were to apply 3 stacks to this current enemy, but eventually if we were to stack it on to 5 stacks, and if we get a new enemy, this 5 stacks will be brought forward. So this trace is extremely important in order to ensure that Jiaoqiu maintains pretty much a 100% coverage on 5 stacks of Acheron Road throughout the entirety of the battlefield. And this is also guaranteed, which means it is not even reliant on EHR. So this will always carry forward this 5 stacks, regardless if there's effect rest or no effect rest, right? So very, very important trace when it comes to improving our overall damage with Jiaoqiu. Minor trace, EHR, fire damage, and speed, they're all pretty good. But like I mentioned, fire damage is probably the weakest one of them all because Jiaoqiu himself does not do that much damage unless you eventually get his E, right? So that's gonna be that. Now going forward to a little bit more of an in-depth analysis on exactly how does vulnerability work, and this is pretty much what makes Jiaoqiu, right? This whole vulnerability mechanic. So in Honkai Starbucks, there are essentially 7 different damage multipliers that will affect your final damage output. These are the common values and these are the rare values. Common values, we have basically attack percentage, damage percentage, and our double crit. The rare values are going to be the debuffs, right? So defense down, res down, vulnerability, as well as weaken, right? Weaken or the toughness multiplier. And all these 7 different attributes, it will affect your final damage. So for some of the unit archetypes, for example, DOT, they don't care about double crit at all, right? Because DOTs for now can't crit. And then for our super breakers, they don't care about damage percentage. Although Fireflies specifically, she does care about attack. That being said, every single damage archetype that we have in Honkai Starbucks, they will be affected by these multipliers here. Defense, especially defense, rares down as well as vulnerability, right? These three are the more common ones that we see as of this current moment. Defense, rares down, vulnerability, and Jiaoqiu's vulnerability down is going to be part of this specific field over here. So how exactly does this work is that, first of all, vulnerability is not to be confused with damage percentage. Like I mentioned in my previous video, you must see the wording, right? So in CN, their wording is this, right? So for example, he used Barco's skill as an example. This is the damage dealt by you increased by this amount. Whereas for vulnerability, is the damage received by the enemy will be increased by this amount, right? So this is usually damage increase, this is usually damage taken increase, right? So that is the two differences between damage and vulnerability. So as such, because vulnerability is such a rare debuff, it can be very, very useful, especially you can stack it up to a very high amount with Jiaoqiu's ultimate damage vulnerability, the signature icon one, very, very nice. And also not very easily to get the diminishing returns compared to attack damage percentage or even double crit, right? That being said, one point is, even though Jiaoqiu does bring about this very rare damage vulnerability debuff, 35% damage vulnerability, if we don't include the 15% ultimate damage vulnerability, it is a little bit too conservative, which means that it sometimes might not even reach a case where it outperforms some of our other supports or debuffers, right? An excellent example being Rame over here. So Rame provides a 60% damage buff. Now this is not damage vulnerability, but because she does provide this massive 60% damage buff, it doesn't really fall off that much compared to 35% damage vulnerability. Then another example is going to be Robin. If we don't consider the additional damage from the ultimate, it also brings about a more or less 130% increase in our overall damage coverage, right? So you can see that even for units without the vulnerability debuff, which is a very rare debuff to have, they can still provide a substantial amount of damage output for our entire team, right? And as such, because Jiaoqiu's value is a little bit low, even units like Pella with 40% defense down, Rame's 25% res down, or even Kui Naifen's 28% vulnerability, they are all pretty decent competitions compared to Jiaoqiu, which may or may not reduce his value as a unit. Because at the end of the day, when you are pulling for a unit as a player, you must ask yourself, does this guy offer something to the table that I'm unable to achieve with my current team comp, right? So unfortunately, because the value is a little bit low, he does face pretty significant competition, or even Lucas 20% vulnerability and even 53% defense reduction from Zero Wolf. So a lot of competition, as well as the 33% res down from Zero Wolf. So yep. With that being said, when it comes to the 泛用性, which is basically how versatile Jiaoqiu is going to be, you can kind of see that a lot of teams, the support specifically, it's irreplaceable. For example, Rame in a super break team, it is pretty much the best in slot option, and on top of being the best in slot option, she can also be used in a lot of different teams, right? You can still use her with hyper carry and you can still use her with DOT on top of being extremely niche in one field. So this is Rame. Whereas for Jiaoqiu at E0S0, for now, he is pretty much tied to Acheron as the best in slot team comp, and there isn't really another option that can compare if you want to talk about alternative team comps for Jiaoqiu, right? So you can see that when it comes to the overall versatility or how viable he is with us, he is not as wide compared to like Rame or even Robin. But that being said, if you want to kind of look at the historical performances of some of the new archetypes that may be a little bit more niche. So for example, maybe Jiaoqiu now only works with Acheron. We could see a rise of even better usage as the team progresses. Because if you guys remember, when Robin first released, she might be, funneled into just for follow-up, right? She's super strong for follow-up. And Rame, when she just released, Super Break didn't even exist yet, right? It is only with the addition of more and more units, it kind of makes the team comp stronger and stronger. So Rame now with Super Break is performing exceedingly well. And Robin, with the addition of Aventurine, the addition of Topaz, and now we have like Han March 7th, follow-up team comp is also performing exceedingly well. So who is to say, maybe in the future one day, if Jiaoqiu gets a more supportive class of units, not just Acheron, maybe we could have like another Harmony support or another Nihility Debuffer, or maybe even another Sustain that could pair even better with a team that has Jiaoqiu and Acheron, then his usage rate, his performances, or maybe even his tier list in the meta might go up as well as time progresses, right? So take that into consideration. Okay, and very quickly on why Jiaoqiu just works so extremely well with Acheron, I think by now we all know. First of all, he stacks on an additional 15% ultimate damage vulnerability, so he does have 50% vulnerability for Acheron's ultimate, and Acheron's ultimate is where majority of damage comes from. And secondly, he gives a lot of slashing for Acheron, from basic, from skill, from ultimate, pretty much bar none when it comes to both damage amplification as well as stacking abilities, Jiaoqiu is the one, right? And lastly, just a little bit thing is a little bit of DOT damage, which could prove useful if the enemies left at like 10% HP, 5% HP, and the DOT can get rid of the enemies, which might potentially save us one entire Acheron ultimate, right? So this is why he's pretty much the best slot for Acheron. Alright, one really good point that maybe players might not fully realize when we are using Jiaoqiu is that when it comes to the skill point positivity as well as theoretical buff coverage, or rather the debuff coverage for Jiaoqiu, it is the strongest as of now, right? And here is why. For both of these reasons, first of all, because we have a lot of opportunities where we can just use basic attack instead of using our skill, and we can still maintain 100% ultimate coverage for units like Acheron. So he is extremely skill point positive compared to a lot of our other supports, and this is especially so if we are going to be running Jiaoqiu with Pella, which if you have a tutorial icon, you are pretty much able to just basic the entire fight and still have 100% ultimate coverage, which is pretty crazy, right? That means that you still need an event like if you don't have it, then it is what it is. Very skill point positive, one of the most skill point positive in the entire team. And then another factor is in pure fiction. This is pretty much one of, if not the key factors that can make Acheron insane in pure fiction. Jiaoqiu with solitary healing is extremely good, and in fact he is the only unit that can say you have a true full coverage for units like pure fiction. Because first of all, his debuffs, everyone can benefit. So DOT units, Acheron, any units that's dealing damage to the enemy team, you can benefit from Jiaoqiu's debuffs. And second of all, this grace, it allows us to pretty much maintain this 5 stacks of action roll throughout the entirety of the battlefield when you pair this up with your ultimate. So when it comes to this buff coverage, if you want to talk about units like Robin, you may face a situation where you miss out on the ultimate, especially if you don't run her with enough follow-up attack frequency units, right? If your Topaz gets stunned or if you don't get hit enough, then you might not be able to get a full coverage, right? And if you are using, like for example, Robin with another unit that's not follow-up team comps, for example, like a hyper carry Impivator Rune team, you might also not get enough coverage for Robin's ultimate, right? So take that into consideration. Then for Runmei, most of the time, because the ultimate only lasts 2 turns and she's most of the time a 3-turn ultimate unit, unless you're running a slow Runmei performing a extremely fast clear, you are also gonna face some downtime for Runmei's ultimate coverage, right? And keep in mind, Runmei's ultimate is 130 energy, so it is almost impossible to maintain 2-turn ultimate with a 2-turn ultimate duration, right? So that is also another consideration. And then lastly, Sparkle is pretty much one of the only units we have that can do a 3-turn ultimate while having a 3-turn coverage with the ultimate, right? So she is pretty good. But then again, she only helps us buff a single unit, right? This is only a single Tanguai, whereas for Jiaoqiu, he does buff our entire team. Take that into consideration. So in conclusion, Jiaoqiu is not exactly weak like what players might be thinking. He's just really bad. But it's just that at the current moment, we could see more potential for growth in the future, especially if they were to add more units that can synergize with a Jiaoqiu Acheron team comp, right? So if you guys like Jiaoqiu, you don't have to worry. He's definitely not going to be weak, especially when you compare him with Acheron. This is basically going to be Jiaoqiu's weakness, right? And kind of the elephant in the room as to why players might not want to pull for Jiaoqiu. So although Jiaoqiu is pretty much a support, he also has a little bit of damage output from his DOT. And as a result, compared to units that are pure supports like Runmei, Sparkle, or even Robin, his overall supporting capabilities, it will be unfortunately lowered to kind of compensate. Because if someone has both debuffs and DOT, it means that their debuff capability is going to be slightly less impactful compared to a unit that is all in on debuffs, right? So it is what it is. Alright, talking about Jiaoqiu's team comp, honestly, very straightforward. You could run Jiaoqiu with DOT, but Jiaoqiu definitely performs far better with Acheron compared to a DOT team comp, right? So very straightforward. And here is pretty much why. If you were to run Jiaoqiu with Acheron, then Jiaoqiu, Acheron, Pella, and Gallagher with, could be multiplication, could be quick proco, or even if you don't want to run Gallagher, if you want to have a little bit more safe team with Fusion Inventory, definitely possible. So this is going to be absolute, pretty much best in slot E0 team that we can run with Acheron right now, featuring Jiaoqiu, right? So very good. All of the buffs, all the vulnerabilities, all of the stacking don't really need to repeat themselves anymore. So just excellent. And then for the sustain slot, if we're not running Gallagher, specifically if we are running a preservation sustain, like I mentioned, there may be situations where Jiaoqiu's and trend of universal market does not clash. Most of the time, it will be just better to just take away Trend and just give them a more durable light cone, like their own signature light cones, because most of the time, unless you're in those niche situations where the elites don't hit you both at the same time, then you don't really need it, right? So it makes your preservation sustain a little bit better, right? Of course, if you were to face another sustain in the future that could make Acheron's damage go up even higher, because as of now, we don't really have this yet. We don't have a abundance sustain because we don't really need preservation that much since, you know, we don't care about Trend. If we have abundance sustain that could improve our Acheron's damage output either via more stash streams or more damage, then that could make Jiaoqiu Acheron team go up even higher, right? So that's gonna be it. Also, specifically for Pure Fiction, Jiaoqiu completely brings Acheron to the next level when it comes to Pure Fiction, right? From probably a tier 2 or tier 1.5 unit, it straight up becomes an almost tier 0 big boy if we were to pair Jiaoqiu with Acheron. Just because of how many stacks that Jiaoqiu can provide. All these wave, all these units, 100% coverage, very, very nice, as you can see from my Critic Experience server program, how well Jiaoqiu performs in Pure Fiction with Acheron, right? Keep in mind, of course, you also need to be a little bit more mindful with the number of waves. So if the waves from the enemy is 4 instead of 5, then there may be a little bit less of a benefit. So you ideally still want to run Jiaoqiu on the side with 5 different units. And one more small point for Acheron is that this is going to be the number of ultimates that Acheron can provide in the entire battle. And with the addition of Jiaoqiu, it basically increases this ultimate frequency by 1 more time, which can allow our average damage be a little bit more consistent, right? Alright, Jiaoqiu and DOT team. So this is going to be trying to make use of Jiaoqiu's 180% fire burn multiplier. Unfortunately, his DOT damage is quite low. Even compared to Kafka, it is around only 70% of Kafka's final damage output, and he does not have Kafka's DOT trigger, right? So his personal DOT impact can be quite small. If you're only running, like for example, Jiaoqiu with Kafka, then you know you can consider not pulling for Jiaoqiu. If you go for Jiaoqiu in a DOT setup, you also must consider what are you replacing Jiaoqiu with? Because right now, this is one of the setup with DOT, right? Kafka, Black Swan, Rame / Robin with Huo. So how impactful the Jiaoqiu store is. So if we're going to be using E0 Ezreal Jiaoqiu to replace E0 Ezreal Rame, under a circumstance of an enemy with fire weakness, it is still only 90% of Rame's total damage output. And if you're going to be with an enemy without fire weakness, then it is around 86% of Rame's total damage output. So regardless of how you see it, his damage still falls off compared to Rame in a DOT team. If it is E0 Ezreal replacing E0 Ezreal Rame, then they are pretty much almost exactly the same, right? So take that into consideration. And then if you want to talk about the replacement, if you're using Robin instead of Rame, then they are also pretty much the same. So you can say that if you already have Rame or Robin and running with your Kafka and Black Swan, the damage increase is almost negligible. It is almost non-existent, right? So pulling Jiaoqiu for DOT might not be that good if you want to replace a support. Right, now speaking about DOT, we also must definitely talk about our E2 S1 Jiaoqiu, which now his burn has a 480% multiplier. Is this gonna be insane? Absolutely in the DOT, but you must always think about opportunity cost. So if you're pulling for an E2 S1 Jiaoqiu, will you think this is more worth it compared to an E2 S1 Firefly or an E2 S1 Acheron? It might not be, because at the end of the day, this is a lot of values invested for a single unit. And then if you want to compare an E2 S1 Jiaoqiu to a E2 S1 Robin, then it is also performing at roughly the same and only stronger by around 10% for building 4 new SSRs, right? This is basically 3 Jiaoqius and 1 Signature Icon. So is this going to be worth a 10% increase compared to an E2 S1 Robin? Then that is going to be up to you. If it's compared to E2 S1 Rame, the damage actually a lot better, because you know Rame's E2 is not that impactful. So it's around 30% better to compare to Rame, right? So that is going to be take it as you will. In Pure Fiction, then Jiaoqiu's performance at E2S1 in Pure Vision is going to be really strong, because now you can deal with the mobs a lot easier without even relying on Acheron's skill and Ultimate. So very good addition. But whether you want to pull in for Pure Vision, that's also going to be up to you. Is it worth getting 4 different 5 stars? Probably not that recommended for the free to plays and low spenders. For the whales, then you know you can kind of consider it yourselves, right? What about our other teams beside DOT, specifically Acheron? Can Jiaoqiu replace any of these DOT units to be ran with Acheron? Now, TLDR, no, he can't replace, right? And here is the reason why. The reason why Acheron works is because Black Swan and Kafka, they inherently work well with each other. Black Swan applies defense down and Arcana. Kafka triggers set Arcana. And all these 2 units provide slash dreams for Acheron. And the final Acheron nuke is going to be provided by Ultima herself, right? So this team synergizes very nicely. Now, if we were to, in a situation where, for example, if we were to take out Kafka instead, then unfortunately for Jiaoqiu, he cannot trigger Black Swan's Arcana DOT, which means that the Black Swan's personal damage does drop down by quite a considerable amount. The vulnerability debuff Jiaoqiu provides is not enough to make up for it, right? So unfortunately, it is what it is. And also, if you want to think about running Jiaoqiu as a debuffer, then running him with Ella/Silver for Acheron, it is still gonna perform better compared to Jiaoqiu with like Black Swan. So that's gonna be that. If you want to run Jiaoqiu with Kafka and Acheron, then overall you're going to be missing out Black Swan's defense down, as well as the fact that Jiaoqiu's personal DOT is just way too low, so Kafka's DOT trigger is also not going to be dealing enough damage, right? So overall, Docron, not recommended. For any of these other units, Yunli, counter, Imbued Lane, Hyper Carry, Jing Hyper Carry, or even the follow-up attack teams, then Jiaoqiu, unfortunately, is just, you know, not that great, right, compared to opportunity cost. Now, it's not to say that he's not usable, it's just that pretty much as of right now, every other team, they have a better substitute. If we use Jiaoqiu as a replacement for any of the units that we have in Hyper Carry, in follow-up, in Yunli's home, it is a full season, which means it negatively impacts their best in slot team. So unfortunately, Jiaoqiu is not going to be providing any sort of benefits to teams aside from Acheron, barely speaking, for DOT, right? So that is going to be that. Alright, and now finally, with all that, you know, advanced analysis, advanced zapping for a full conversion, now we can talk about a little bit about light cones and relics, right? So Jiaoqiu's signature light cone 1 is a very, very strong light cone, regardless of the damage himself as well as the support capabilities. The 35% goes up all the way to 59% vulnerability, and then if you were to add another 15%, that is gonna be a 74% damage vulnerability for Acheron, right? So very, very comfortable icon, so take that into consideration. And then if we want to use E0S1, then he does kind of fall in quite closely with the likes of a powerhouse like Ramei, right? So really good signature light cone. If you want to see another close comparison of who can use this signature light cone, you can check out my previous video where even Black Swan can mirrors of Jiaoqiu's signature light cone, right? So a pretty good pool. When it comes to other alternatives, you can kind of consider the event light cone or resolution. Don't really need to repeat myself. The point still stands, same as my previous video. Resolution if Jiaoqiu is the only debuffer. Event light cone if you are running him with Pella. If none of these works, Pure Vision runs solitary healing, and absolute no other choice than Eyes of the Prey, right? Alright, for Jiaoqiu's relic recommendations, very easy. Best in slot at the moment is going to be 4-piece Ego, because first of all, Jiaoqiu does have a 3-turn ultimate more or less quite consistently. Sometimes if you could even squeeze a 2-turn ultimate, might be possible, right? So 4-piece Ego, just for the extra action value, can be quite good for Jiaoqiu. If you don't run 4-piece Ego, running 2-piece Hacker Space plus any of the other sets, you know, just for a little bit more for the DOT can work, right? So very, very easy to build. For our main stats, EHR, speed, fire damage, and energy generation, not too much to talk about over here. You can run attack percentage for DOT. If you don't want to run fire damage, you run something defensive, it can also work because, like I mentioned, Jiaoqiu's personal damage is just very, very low, so we don't really need to care about it that much, right? So speed for subsets is going to be more important than EHR, and ideally you want to try to hit above 160 speed and above 100 EHR. Kind of refer to my previous early access video to see the stat distribution. The reason why 100 EHR is because most of these light cones does provide up to 40% EHR for Jiaoqiu. That's why you can kind of still hit the thresholds without needing that much EHR subsets. Alright, one final section, which is going to be Jiaoqiu's Eidolons, faster stacking from Ashen Roast. And aside from the initial battle, every single time it is going to be at 5 stacks anyways. So you might not see a very high usage rate as the battle drags on, because you're going to be at 5 stacks for pretty much entire battle, right? The 40% damage increase, it can be very, very beneficial. For Acheron team con, it's going to be a 17% increase in damage, and for DOT team con, it's going to be a 21% increase in damage, right? So that is going to be that. Compared to most Eidolon ones at roughly at 12% damage increase, this Eidolon one is actually pretty damn good, right? For Eidolon 2, increase our DOT damage multiplier by 300%. As you can see, multiply our DOT by 2.666 times, which is a very, very considerable. And it pretty much makes our DOT team go up from 28 to 41% final damage increase, right? So very, very good if you're going to be running him with a DOT setup, which ideally, if you want to consider running Jiaoqiu for DOT, this should be the Eidolon to consider getting, right? So that's gonna be that. E3, this changes nothing. 3 and 4 don't really need to talk about it that much. And finally, E6. E6 is pretty much the one that makes Jiaoqiu one of, if not the best debuffs that we have in the game. Not only do we have red spam, but we also take everything up to 9 stacks, right? So as you guys can see from the 1 versus $2,000 video, this E6 pretty much changes everything. Insane damage for Acheron, for DOT. Classic whale stuff, don't really need too much to say about it. So with that, we'll come to the end of Jiaoqiu CN unit analysis. Let me know what you guys think of him below. Word of the day is gonna be 5 a.m. because it is currently 5. Actually, it's almost 6 a.m. So that's gonna be that, right? So join Discord, join Twitch, join YouTube. Let me know how Jiaoqiu is for you. All the best for Jiaoqiu boost, and I'll see you guys next time. Okay.